5, we encourage frankness, openness, objectivity, and professionalism in the conduct of all participants in today's activity. Number 6, please bear in mind that it is also my duty to ask anyone who exceeds the time permitted to them to speak to either wrap up or stop. Refusal to cooperate will result in I politely cutting you off. Presenters are reminded that this event is not a radio talk show, so unfortunately, some of the latitude that callers have on a radio talk show will not be afforded to them here. And I shall introduce the first speaker, who is Mr. Severin Mackenzie, the president of the Dominica Business Forum and former president of the Manufacturers Association, one of my closest colleagues in this organization. There's so much that can be said about him, but you will learn more about the man as he speaks. Ladies and gentlemen, I present Mr. Severin Mackenzie.
Okay. Good morning, everybody.
You can clap him.
Good morning, everybody. So Dennis Byron, members of the Electoral Commission who are in-house and online with a virtual connection. The staff of Sir Dennis Byron, who we have been working with over the last few months in organizing this activity. The members of the Dominica Business Forum, who have gone the extra mile who have gone the extra mile in getting this activity going. And you'll realize that it's only what we call resilience in the true form that we could actually be starting the activity at this stage. Mr. Duncan Stowe is supposed to be somewhere listening, who is the chairman of the Electoral Commission. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, the media, and all those who have assisted in making this event possible. We know that we are more than almost 2 hours late through no fault of ours, but according to Fidel Castro, the rain will not stop progress from moving on. And for that, we decided to hold on, and we are well on the way. So let me see if I can quickly go over the presentation that I had, which is to give an overview of where we started and where we are. The Dominica Business Forum came into existence in 2012 when a number of private sector organizations signed a memorandum of understanding, giving birth to the organization. In February of 2018, the Business Forum was incorporated under the laws of Dominica as a non-profit organization. The Dominica Business Forum's involvement in this consultation on electoral reform legislation is a continuation of the initiative started in January 2019, when as a result of increasing hostility on the issue of electoral reform, we witnessed the intervention of the police with the use of tear gas on a group of peaceful demonstrators in December of 2018. Historically, the private sector in Dominica has fallen victim and suffered the brunt of any political unrest in Dominica, where businesses have been looted and burned to the ground. Coming from the experience of the Hurricane Maria the year before, the Dominica Business Forum Inc. decided to intervene in the electoral reform matter through dialogue. In January of 2019, the DBF Inc. invited a number of private sector organizations and civil society organizations to a meeting, and out of this initiative, the electoral reform group consisting of the Dominica Christian Council, the Dominica Association of Evangelical Churches, the Waterfront and Allied Workers Union, the Dominica Public Service Union, the Dominica Bar Association, the Dominica Manufacturers Association, and the Builders and Contractors Association of Dominica, the electoral reform group emerged. Anthony LeBlanc will give a synopsis of the work that was done by the electoral reform group and the report that we submitted as we produced as a result of our efforts. That report was presented to the joint OAS CARICOM and Commonwealth Secretariat mission in August of 2019. And there is no doubt that it influenced the report of the mission that was subsequently submitted to the authorities. Since we could identify some of our recommendations in that report. So today, we are pleased to be associated with the consultative process of reviewing the existing electoral legislation and to make the necessary recommendations for the new legislation. When Sir Dennis Byron contacted the DBF Inc. to inform us of his engagement by the government of Dominica to review electoral legislation, we agreed to engage him in discussion on the matter. In fact, our first contact with Sir Dennis Byron was on the 1st of February 2021 when we received the following letter from him. Dear Mr. Mackenzie, the electoral reform in Dominica. As you may be aware, the government of the Commonwealth of Dominica has asked me to conduct a review of the electoral process, system, and laws of Dominica with a view to making recommendations for meaningful reform that will improve the system. The specific objectives I have been assigned to are: 1, review existing legislation, reports from the various chief election officers, elections observers and experts, including the addendum by the Commonwealth expert Pauline Welch, contact and review the results of public consultations and advise on changes to improve the electoral process. 2, review and advise on the provisions for eligibility to vote, including the use of identification cards for the purpose of voting, and whether the law ought to provide for other or additional methods of identification in keeping with the constitutional right to vote. And 3, advise on the best process for maintaining the updated electoral register that will not result in the repudiation of the right to vote or the disenfranchisement of legitimate qualified voters, including the process recommended in the aforementioned addendum, and or by any submissions or recommendations made by stakeholders during the public consultation. The specific actions I have been tasked with are: 1, conduct consultations with stakeholders to include the government, political parties, civil society, civic groups, NGOs, and other interested persons, individuals, organizations, or groupings, and invite written or oral submissions from stakeholders. 2, review electoral law, draft electoral amendment bills, and submissions written and oral, and conduct research if necessary or required. And 3, provide a report and advise on the way forward, including but not limited to any recommended legislation reforms to achieve the above stated objectives. I therefore invite you to consider and submit written submissions to me via the attached questionnaire in relation to the objectives of the terms of reference to improve the electoral system. I would ask that you endeavor to provide your submissions by Thursday, 11 February 2021. This will allow me time to carefully review your submissions and consult where necessary to get clarifications for further details. I have consulted with the newly instituted Electoral Commission, and we have agreed to collaborate on the project. I very much look forward to receiving your written submissions. Yours faithfully, Sir Dennis Byron. So this was the communication that we in the Dominica Business Forum received, and I believe that maybe other organizations received the same communication. So the Dominica Business Forum responded to Sir Byron with the following. Dear Sir Byron, electoral reform in Dominica. In response to your correspondence to the Dominica Business Forum, Inc., dated 1st February 2021, with regards to the above captioned in an earlier response which we acknowledged, I indicated that the correspondence was forwarded to our member organizations for their contribution. Your request for submissions by Thursday, 11 February 2021 was not possible, but we trust that the deadline given is subject to an extension, given the significance of the matter. I wish to inform you that the DBF Inc. initiated a private sector and civil society electoral reform exercise referred to as the Electoral Reform Group, which resulted in a comprehensive report with recommendations for the enhancement of the electoral process in the Commonwealth of Dominica. And I went on to tell him which of the organizations that were involved. The exercise was conducted during the period of January to December 2019, prior to the last general elections, and it included extensive research on the electoral process, stakeholder consultations, which included sessions with all political parties, meetings with His Excellency, the President of Dominica, and the town hall meetings. A copy of the report can be made available to you upon request, but most significantly, the DBF Inc. would like to engage you in discussions on the matter in order to obtain a better understanding of your engagement. We are available for an in-person or virtual discussion at your convenience. We also recommend that consideration be given to similar public discussions for a satisfactory outcome of your intervention. So basically, this was the correspondence that we exchanged with Sir Byron. With this initial correspondence, the DBF Inc. and Sir Byron have been in continuous communication and consultation leading up to today. I am sure that Sir Dennis Byron will admit that he has met a tough group of guys who have really challenged him on his mission. We have been quite blunt, for example, in telling him that we had many concerns with the survey that he initiated. Our discussion with him have been mutually respectful, frank, open, and transparent. We have disagreed on many issues, but we have agreed to disagree. A reminder of a famous advertisement on DBS radio some time ago. Dominicans have yearned for electoral reform for many years, and the term and the events of the last election cycles have created a new sense of urgency because the shortcomings and loopholes in the existing legislation, which previous administrations were apparently not aware of, have been exploited and abused in recent times to the extent that the existing electoral legislation can be considered a farce, which gives unfair advantage to the incumbent. The electoral climate in Dominica has changed, but the pre-independent legislation has not. And as a result, it is totally inadequate with the realities of the 21st century. We are the politicians are 10 steps ahead of the legislation and are able to manipulate it to their advantage. For this reason, in our discussion with Sir Byron, we clearly indicated that there should be no such thing as selected or partial electoral reform. Dominica needs a comprehensive electoral reform which addresses all the shortcomings of the existing legislation, since we are not doing it for our generation, but for future generations. In fact, a significant number of advocates for electoral reform have gone to the great beyond and did not have the privilege to even witness today's event. So too, some of us may not be there by the time this process comes to some type of fruition. It has taken us 43 years since independence to do this review, and it is only reasonable that we leave a positive legacy for our grandchildren and their grandchildren. One that does not include having to worry about the mechanism in which our leaders are elected. We recognize that there are different approaches towards addressing the issue of electoral reform, and where the authority lies with respect to the chain of command. The President of the Commonwealth of Dominica is responsible for the appointment of the Electoral Commission. Therefore, it is understood that the President is the main authority, followed by Electoral Commission, which has the constitutional powers, then the Parliament, then the Government and Cabinet of Ministers, and at the bottom of the chain are the people. The government has used its authority to engage Sir Byron to undertake the review of the electoral legislation. And though many of us may have taken objection in the manner in which he was appointed, it is important that our eyes be kept on the prize, which is electoral reform for Dominica. I am concerned about the negative response and personal attacks has not been heard. You hear it on your study? Okay, all right. No, 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 but this is okay. It's not, it's my computer current. Okay. So there are some issues that we really would like, and Tony will be, in fact, in his presentation, highlight them in maybe more detail. But we are okay. All right. Another point that we are concerned about is electoral. I think in the other CARICOM countries, such as Jamaica, we could look at other CARICOM countries for the precedent that has been set in terms of best practice. Jamaica on campaign financing, St. Kitts on overseas voters, Antigua on the time it took to implement reform, which could be used as part of the template. With the Westminster system being the dominant type of governance within the Commonwealth, we do not have to reinvent the wheel in putting together the best practice for electoral legislation. The crossing of the floor by elected parliamentarians must be considered unacceptable in any legislation. It is highly disrespectful, selfish, and opportunistic for a candidate to convince the electorate to vote for him or her on certain issues and principles, and to totally disrespect and disregard them and cross the floor in joining an opposing party. An elected parliamentarian who wishes to switch sides after an election should be subjected to a by-election and let the people decide his fate. Access to state media, campaign financing, what is the most effective way for Dominicans, oath office to participate in the process? What is the status of the economic citizenship as far as citizens, as far as electoral reform is concerned? And there are a number of other areas that we have identified which need attention. So, though the government of Dominica may have engaged you for the assignment, Sir Byron, we are taking this opportunity to call on the constitutionally mandated Electoral Commission to take up its responsibility in broadening the scope of the engagement of Sir Byron, to include a comprehensive reform of the electoral legislation for the Commonwealth of Dominica, to ensure an amicable, orderly, and equitable selection of government. This, I hope, will be my only contribution for the day, as we extend an open invitation to the private sector and civil society organizations to make their voices heard. We thank all of you here who are present and others who are joining via Zoom, radio, on social media. To the presenters, I wish to reemphasize that any personal attacks or insults will not be permitted. In the words of Karl Marx, religion has been seen as the opium of the nation. But in the Commonwealth of Dominica today, I can clearly state that tribal political politics, partisan politics, is in fact the opium of the nation, which continues to divide. Where the bare concept of right and wrong is replaced by political party political party one supports. Our involvement in this exercise can be questioned by many, and we have been told that we should not get involved in politics. But our lives, our businesses, our investments depend on the political decisions. So to set the record straight, we will be involved in politics because it's a determinant of life and death, success or failure. What we will stay away from is tribal partisan politics, which is tearing away the moral fabric of our democracy. Let's hope that the beginning of the end of this insanity starts today. So Byron, we in the Dominica Business Forum pledge our support to you in delivering the best results of this exercise for the benefit of the Dominican people, and we look forward to a satisfactory outcome. The final decision will be in the hands of the politicians, but only this ultimate decision will be in the hands of the Most High, who has total control. We look forward for a productive session today. Thanks. Thank you very much. No, the Electoral Commission. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks so much on behalf of the Dominica Business Forum. At this stage, we're going to keep moving. You know, the time is against us. And I would like to invite to the head table Mr. Wayne James, who represents the Dominica Electoral Commission. Give him a warm welcome. Thank you. Mr. James.
Otherwise, I was just going to tell you speak for here.
Hey, come here.
Speak for here, you'll get right.
Okay, he'll speak from Tony's mic.
My commitment remains the same to serve the people of Dominica on the Electoral Commission. My wish is that we have electoral reform. Since the beginning of the electoral legislation review process with Sir Dennis Byron, I have made a deliberate attempt to listen to the varying viewpoints on the process. While I have heard various views on the engagement of Sir Dennis, at the end of the exercise, it is a step to electoral reform, which we all want. As a member of the Electoral Commission, I have the opportunity to and continue to make my contribution towards electoral reform. I therefore welcome the opportunity provided by the Dominica Business Forum to allow Sir Dennis to hear from the various stakeholders in the private sector. It is my hope that there will be other opportunities for Sir Dennis to hear from the wider public. Over the past general elections, we have had various organizations observe our elections and have submitted recommendations for electoral reform, which was never implemented. Sir Dennis will submit a report with the people's recommendation, but is the implementation of these recommendations that will give us the much needed reform that we all desire. It is my hope that the government will make the commitment to ensure that the people's recommendations will be implemented in advance of the next general elections in Dominica. At this time, I just want to quote from our Constitution. At section 51 of the Constitution of Dominica, it states, every proposed bill and every proposed regulation or other instrument having the force of law relating to the registration of electors for the purpose of electing representatives or to the election of representatives and senators shall be referred to the Electoral Commission and to the Chief Elections Officer at such time as shall give them sufficient opportunity to make comments thereon before the bill is introduced in the House, or as the case may be, the regulations or instrument is made. Dominicans at home and abroad, this is why, in spite of all the forums that Sir Dennis will engage himself with, and the report, as I said, the recommendation will be the people's recommendation. It is only the commitment for the implementation of such recommendations that Dominicans will be in a position to say that they have received the electoral reform that we all desire. Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. James of the Electoral Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would like to introduce the main speaker, maybe the moment that many of us have been waiting for, Sir Dennis Barron. But may I say before he takes the mic, is that Sir Dennis Barron is petition born, and he's a consultant, or the consultant recruited by the government of the Commonwealth of Dominica to
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I lost you again.
Are you hearing us?
Yes, I just heard you.
Can you hear us now, Sir Byron?
I can hear you now.
Yeah, but we cannot
Okay,
hear
but
you.
we can't hear you.
You cannot hear me?
Is
Oh dear.
your mic unmuted? You can
Yes.
hear? Okay.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. Are you ready for me to speak now? Again, I've lost sound. I'm not hearing you.
Speak from this.
We have introduced you and you can go ahead with your presentation now. We can hear you clearly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. I'm really very happy to be able to share in this very important consultation. As you all know, I've been working very closely with the Electoral Commission, and with them and myself, we are very grateful to the Dominica Business Forum for their initiatives which have led to this consultation. And I'd like to pay special tribute to them because ever since the assumption of my task, they have taken a very active role in providing me with their opinions and their recommendations and engaging with me. I have written and tried to reach out to many other organizations, but this is the organization which has really exercised a lot of interest and commitment in trying to contribute to this process. So when they requested this opportunity to organize a live consultative forum, I accepted with pleasure, because I think this is a tremendous opportunity to hear from an important section of the Commonwealth of Dominica. Now, when we had discussed the agenda, it was clear that neither the Electoral Commissioners nor I would be the major presenters. What these consultations were aimed at primarily is for me to get a better understanding of what the community in Dominica thinks about the electoral process and what its vision and its expectations are of my work. And so I am very happy that this opportunity has been presented by the forum, as I am sure it will contribute to the process enormously. And so I do not intend to occupy very much time as I make these few opening remarks. Now, I had engaged in a public survey, and it had been expected that there would have been a lot of interest in it. But initially, response was slow, so we extended the time for completion with the intention to make certain that everybody who wished to participate would have an opportunity to do so. The survey has now been completed, and the process of analysis of its results is ongoing. The type of engagement that we have today is a different type of consultation, where we will be exposed to the views of contributors. And for me, I expect to be in a learning mode as I look forward to the contributions that will be made during the course of this exercise. My mandate became necessary because the electoral process had become so contentious that the much needed reforms could not find consensus. Understanding the history and evolution of the problem is important. You know, as Brother Mackenzie, Severin Mackenzie, mentioned earlier, we are operating in a context where throwing off the historical impact of our colonial past has not been as thorough as it could have been. The regulatory framework for the electoral process is old and it needs modernization. Important aspects of my work include reviewing the existing legislation and the various reports, opinions, and views that have been expressed by previous advisors on the reform of the electoral process. I must also understand the mood of the population and its underlying expectations. So I must pay attention and be aware of what has been happening and what is happening now. These consultations will assist in providing that understanding. This is not to encourage any body or myself being judgmental, but to provide an important factual backdrop to my exercise. Gathering information through written submissions, surveys, and these community oral consultations will give me understanding. And I think that is a very good thing. It's highly beneficial that any recommendations I make will be grounded in and reflective of the views of the community. My recommendations must, of course, reflect my own independent judgment. But this judgment will have the benefit of being refined by exposure to the views and opinions which will emerge from these and other consultative exercises. As I move to close these opening remarks, I'll just give a brief indication of some of the objective values against which the electoral process should be tested. We must bear in mind the real purpose of elections. Their objective is secure and sustain a legitimate government within an inclusive and democratic society. Such a society or democracy must be built on the firm foundation of respect for people and their human, social, and political rights. These rights should guarantee political equality and freedom from discrimination so that everyone would have equal rights to participate fully in the political process, to receive and impart information, and to associate freely with others in order to advance political views and interests. Everyone who has the right to do so must be allowed to vote and to stand for election. The voting criteria must therefore be clearly regulated with provisions to ensure compliance. This requires the maintenance of permanent, publicly available electoral registers that are regularly updated with provisions for the correction of errors of improper inclusions or omissions. People must have equal voting rights and power. Equal opportunity must be guaranteed to political parties and candidates. These are the values which make the question of voter identification so important to prevent things like double voting or voter impersonation. These values also underpin concerns about political spending and campaign financing. People must have freedom of expression and association. This implies that state authorities managing elections must have a duty of neutrality. The concept that voters are free to express their wishes on the ballot requires action to combat electoral fraud. This action would include having simple, safe, and efficient voting procedures. Steps must be taken to ensure that there is no violation of the secrecy of the ballot as an important element of the electoral process. And of course, the counting of votes must be transparent, as well as safe and efficient. I'm very interested in the modernization of the process, using the best technology that is available and automating the process where possible. I think it's critical to leverage the most up-to-date form of technology to achieve the results that we are looking for. An efficient and effectively updated register of electors in real time, associated with an efficient and foolproof method of identifying persons who come forward to vote, to eliminate any types of fraud or impersonation or double voting, and an automated system of counting the votes will go a long way to assure everybody of the efficiency and fairness of the system. When coupled with effective measures to punish misconduct, whether it has to do with campaign financing or any other type of electoral fraud, such a system should go a long way to make people satisfied that the electoral vote system cannot be manipulated by any authority, and that the electoral process will result in a legitimate government fit for the inclusive and democratic Commonwealth of Dominica. So those are some of the values against which my recommendations I would expect them to be tested. So at this stage now, I will allow myself to be educated by the views that you have to present during the remainder of this consultative exercise. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Moderator, I'm not hearing you again.
Yeah, you have to speak from
Ladies and gentlemen, I present to the podium Mr. Anthony Libla, And just a brief bio on Mr. Anthony Lipka.
Just a minute.
Mhm.
The chairman of the Electoral Commission just just joined us. So I would maybe would just check to see if he's available. He requested to make the comments. Is Mr. Stowe available?
Hello, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we cannot hear you. He's saying something, but we cannot hear him.
Can you hear me?
Mr. Stowe, I can hear you. I'm not sure if anybody else can. I'm very happy you're able to join us now.
I've been on from the beginning, Sir Dennis, and
Yes, I
following
saw
all
it.
the issues there.
Yeah, I saw your print since 9 o'clock this morning.
Duncan, are you available?
Can you hear me, Mr. Mackenzie? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yeah, Duncan, I'm hearing you. I think there's something.
There's some problems.
Yeah,
I can hear you as well, Mr. Chair.
Loud and clear.
Okay, Duncan. Mr. Stowe, you can go ahead.
You can hear me? Can you hear me, Sarah?
Go ahead, Duncan, loud and clear.
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Chairman and other members, and also Dennis and other members of his team, members of the Business Forum and listeners. Well, I've been signed on from 9 o'clock and trying to follow, been seeing the challenges that we've had, but happy am I to be here and to be part of this morning's or today's session. The question is often asked of me, well, what is our mandate as a commission? My primary answer is often, well, the commission's duties are summed up in section 38(1) of the Dominica Constitution. The section reads as follows: the Electoral Commission shall be responsible for the registration of voters for the purpose of electing representatives and for the conduct of elections of representatives and senators, and shall have such powers and other functions relating to such registration and elections as may be prescribed by law. But these functions are often executed with the assistance of the Chief Elections Officer, who is also mentioned in the Constitution. It is worthy to note that while Section 38(1) speaks of the Commission's mandate, the Constitution does not contain any provision on how the Commission should conduct its work, a point which was recently raised in a report by the elections expert, Pauline Welch. In light of such limitations, the Commission often applies the best principles practice or best practice principles when it's faced with challenges. Mr. Chairman, I recognize that we are here today because of the limitations in the law and the continuing public concerns expressed about the electoral process in Dominica. I do not want to bore listeners by repeating the list of issues that often are debated, but we will all agree, though, that the gravamen of all discussions is on free and fair election. Some issues that were raised by Sir Dennis, and of course, They are worth repeating. We're also part of a review of the Electoral Commission in Britain, and a report was presented some time ago by the Committee on Standards in Public Life. And they dealt also with the issue of free and fair elections, our focus. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, the report states in part, effective electoral administration underpins our democracy. There cannot be democracy without elections, and elections cannot be free and fair unless electoral rules are fair and coherent, unless they are properly administered, and unless they are actively enforced. Core functions that must be effectively undertaken to achieve this are ensuring that everyone who is entitled to vote is included on the electoral register before an election, and that everyone registered can exercise their vote in secrecy if they wish. The right to register and the right to vote is an equal right for those who are eligible and should be kept as simple as possible, and any barriers kept to a minimal, whilst ensuring that everyone not entitled to vote is excluded from the register and from voting. Voting fraud should be minimized by avoiding rules that facilitate such fraud and by proactive deterrence and enforcement. Mr. Chairman, listeners, as a commission, we pledge to maintain the highest standards of professionalism in executing our duties. I would like at this point to, on behalf of the Commission, to compliment wholeheartedly the sterling efforts of the consultant, Sir Dennis Byron, and the Dominica Business Forum. I have no doubt that today's consultation will give a fillip to the process of electoral reform now taking place in Dominica. I thank you.
UK-based engineer.
Tony, put off your microphone now.
He's a registered engineer with the Board of Engineering Dominica and member of Dominica Association of Professional Engineers. Current president of Builders and Contractors Association of Dominica, member of Board of Governors of Dominica Business Forum, and participant, member of 2019 Electoral Reform Effort Group. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Mr. Anthony LeBlanc.
I am on Zoom. Now I'm trying to share. I'm not in my. Shared it a while ago and now I can't find it. Okay, I think I'm here now. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, again. Is my screen share being viewed? Good. All right. I need to do one more thing, get rid of this. All right. So I come before you not with all the accolades as Sir Byron or Mr. Stowe or the others, but I hope that I can bring some light to where we are with electoral reform and where we need to go. We have to journey out of that indelible ink era that we have established since 1985. And we have to go towards a more appropriate electoral reform. So let's see what are the expectations of the electoral reform, the reasons and the scope. I need to turn up something that my mouse doesn't seem to give me. Let me see if I can get rid of that. Give me a minute. Yeah, that's okay. So going forward, the full scope of electoral reform, inclusive of campaign finances, access to state media, minimizing the advantage of the incumbency, and constituency boundary redistribution should be undertaken. This reform ought also to set the boundaries on the calling of general elections, being cognizant of the time stipulated for corrections of primary electors list and the submission of claims and objections before the final list is presented. These reforms ought to include the constitutional provisions respecting the composition, financing, independence, and powers of the Electoral Commission. And that's an excerpt from a press conference from the Electoral Reform Group, December 5th, 2019. So the desirable result of a good electoral reform effort is that it provides the setting for an environment where, from election campaign to polling day, voters widely perceive and accept the processes and activities as being conducted transparently and fairly, and the results are to be honored. The Joint Commission from CARICOM, OECS, and the Commonwealth in September 2019 remind us electoral reform should ideally be a continuous process. So let's look at the administrative reforms that are necessary. The Electoral Commission, the Electoral Office, and Constituency Boundaries Commission. As we said in December 2019, credible electoral reform should enhance the constitutional provisions respecting the composition, financing, independence, and powers of the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission to date is made of 5 members, 2 members from the party forming government side, 2 members of the opposition party, and 1 member nominated by the president. In recent years and election cycles, there have been significant public concern and even accusations that members of the Electoral Commission have been functioning based on party dictates rather than national interests. It is recommended that the membership of the Commission should not be limited to only 2 political parties and 1 presidential nominee. It is further recommended that no more than 1 commissioner should be nominated by any 1 political party, including the parties forming government and that of the leader of opposition, and that civil society and church and business sectors should be represented. We therefore recommend a 7-member committee, 1 member from the party forming government, 1 from the party of the leader of the opposition, 1 member jointly recommended by the remaining political parties and nominated by the president, 1 member jointly recommended by trade unions, 1 member jointly recommended by Dominica Business Forum, the business sector, 1 member jointly recommended by the church, the Dominica Christian Council, the Dominica Association of Evangelical Churches, and nominated by the president, and 1 member jointly recommended by identified civil society organization or professional bodies and nominated by the president. The chairperson would be appointed by the president from among those nominees, not an extra person. The president would be at liberty to appoint a person if a nomination is not presented within a prescribed time from the respective bodies. The Electoral Reform Group, in its interim report on dated 8th April 2019, had a recommendation number 5, and it reads, an amendment is to be made either to the existing regulations, if possible, or to the parent relevant laws to enable the financial independence of the Electoral Commission and Electoral Office from the executive branch of government. This amendment can cause the office of the Chief Elections Officer to be at a level of a permanent secretary as an accounting officer, giving the Electoral Office its own budget to be approved by Parliament alongside with and independently of that of the executive branch of government. The justification for that is that this amendment will see the realization of the true independence of the Electoral Commission and the Chief Election Officer, and enable them to carry out their work without perceived or real interference by the executive branch of government through the withholding of approval of financing for electoral reform or the work of the Electoral Commission or Office. Constituency boundary reform, size equalization. The final report of the Commonwealth Observer Mission to Dominica, election 2014, on page 22 reads, the current electoral boundaries are outdated and a fresh delimitation exercise should be conducted to equalize the size of the constituencies. The report of the Joint Special Reform Mission to Dominica in September on page 6 says, the Constitution stipulates that all constituencies shall contain as nearly equal numbers of inhabitants as appears to the Constituency Boundaries Commission to be reasonable practicable. For the December 2014 parliamentary elections, the size of these constituencies ranged from a low of 1564 electors to a high of 7446, further highlighting the need to review of existing electoral boundaries. Electoral reform would be incomplete without some attention to electoral boundaries and whether the Constituency Boundary Commission ought to be subject to the Electoral Commission. So let's look at campaign and candidate reform. And again, the final report of the Commonwealth Observer Mission to Dominica 2014 election on page 21 says, while the credibility and transparency of the electoral process can be claimed, the mission concludes, however, that the election was not necessarily fair due to lack of balance and in some cases lack of professionalism of the media, the absence of campaign finance regulations, and the resultant lack of transparency on financing, coupled with exponentially increased expense associated with campaigning, multiple instances of cheating and bribery, including the transportation of electors to the island to vote, and the apparent abuse of the incumbency, including a lack of impartiality in the provision of public services. So let's look at appropriate legislation reform in that area. That has to include campaign finance restriction and management, as recommended by various observer reports, and accountability requirements, including relevant and functional IPO. We know that our IPO legislation is not really functional. We know it was dismantled to prevent it from having teeth. We need to improve it at the same time if we have to improve campaign finance management. And we need to understand that we need to have a certain degree or an absolute degree of prohibition of foreign government campaign financing. We cannot have foreign governments buying our government or procuring government for us. Disarming inequitable advantages of the incumbency, including equitable access to state media by all candidates, curtailing the use of state resources for campaign purposes by the incumbent. For example, when we fix a playing field just so that the government party can use the resources for a campaign event, that is inequitable advantages of the incumbency. Provide equitable resources such as security details to candidates. all candidates are at a risk at that time. Prohibition of the use of development aid as a campaign aid. And often that's another way foreign government gets in our election cycles. Campaign and candidate reform has to go further and deal with treating during campaign and polling day and after. Expanding the campaign-free zone from 100 yards. Those are some of the recommendations of the observer group. Codifying certain aspects of treating, such as overseas transport and big boom boxes, events with overseas entertainers. And then we look at candidate accountability. Mr. McKenzie mentioned crossing the floor. When a parliamentarian is elected on a certain aspect of policy and promises, we have to decide whether it is right that he seeks a new mandate if he no more represent the purposes and the basis by which he was elected. And cleaning up after campaign, we have to have some environmental stewardship after election. Dominica is usually a mess. So looking at the Electoral Reform Group press statement of 5th December 2019, we said credible electoral reform efforts and education ought to urge citizens to engage in this franchise of voting with well-formed consciences, avoiding being victims to bribery and other illicit practices that would corrupt the electoral process, and to pay attention to and comply with electoral laws. So let's look at voter registration, verification, and identification. The final report of the Commonwealth Observer Mission to Dominica in 2014, page 22 reads, the list currently complies with legislation, but it is widely discredited. There appears to be credible public appetite for the revision of legislation guiding the compilation of the voters' register, and for elections to be more reflective of the wishes of persons resident in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Voter registration verification. Voter verification exercise, that house-to-house conduct of re-verification, is perhaps the most efficient way of cleaning the list and reassigning voters to their respective polling station. The Commission promised to do that before the last elections. As a matter of fact, they say it would take 6 months, 4 to 6 months to do it. It never started. And it's also the most effective way of issuing voter ID. You know where the people are, you verify that they exist, you verify that they're on the list, you can give them an ID. Registration reform, there appears to be the issue of verifying identities of new voters before the last general election. I had a registering officer who admitted to me, well, the gentleman brought him, so I imagine he knew who he was, and he was correct. Nothing was in place to identify the person the gentleman brought. The need for ID cards in the registering process itself has to be part of the reform. Currently, there is no means of cross-checking that a particular person is not registered in another constituency, eliminating multiple registration, which we know exists. The place of ID cards, the time limit on phasing out indelible ink has long gone. Certainly, debate on the national ID versus the voter ID. The survey that is conducted by this reform process assumes that it's okay with everybody to have a national ID and not a voter ID. We have to continue the debate and the decision of whether comprehensive biometrics, everything that you are, is recorded on a voter ID card, or whether very simple identifying biometrics like photograph and possible fingerprints is all that is necessary. To identify ourselves with our passport, you only need a photograph. Why do you have to know the distance between my pupils for me to vote? The 5-year scenario. We need to amend the legislation to deal with the absence from consecutive voting, not necessarily 5 years out of Dominica. Anti-residency with submission of tax return. The right to vote evokes a duty to pay taxes. The Electoral Reform Group, in its interim report of April 2019, had recommendation number 3. An amendment is made either to the existing regulation, if possible, or to the current relevant laws that persons who do not present themselves to vote in 2 consecutive general elections over a period of not less than 5 years shall be removed from the list of eligible voters. And there was a proposed mechanism. First, the Electoral Commission, having examined the data on the past 2 consecutive general elections, shall write to every registered voter at their registered address, requesting that the voter confirms that he still resides at the registered address. The onus would be on the registered elector to respond to Electoral Commission, stating either it still resides in that, or he or she still resides in the registered address, or indicating it has moved to either another polling district or out of state, and the time since it had done so, or he or she had done so. If the registered elector does not respond, then the electoral office shall then remove the name from the list of the registered electors. The justification is simple. This amendment would nullify the vexing provisions of having to verify that non-resident registered Dominicans have returned to the state within the last 5 years, and therefore are still eligible to remain on the electors list and to vote. But additionally, it deals effectively with persons who are dead. They cannot write back. And persons being Commonwealth citizens who no longer are resident in Dominica. It is a very cost-effective way to continually revise and sanitize the list. And we have a similar thing happening with Dominica Social Security Pension Scheme, where the Dominica Social Security require that if you're alive and you're a pensioner, you have to fill in a life certificate, I believe they call it. You have to have a notary public or justice of peace or somebody else verifying that you're alive. So polling day and monitoring. And we go back to a press release on the 5th of December, 2019. These reforms ought also to set boundaries on the calling of general elections, being cognizant of the time stipulated for corrections of primary electors list and the submission of claims and objections before the final list are presented. The final report of the Commonwealth Observer Mission in 2014 says, the role of civil society is in domestic observation of future elections should be enhanced, and the training of domestic observer group considered a priority. So of course, as I said before, we need to restrict that privilege of calling a poll whenever you want, irregardless to whether it is 2 days after the 30th of September when the lists are issued. We need to provide time for corrections, for claims, for objections to entries on the last list. That did not happen in our last general elections. Persons who had corrections or objections or claims were not heard. Voters were disenfranchised. Voting protocol. We have to safeguard the integrity of the secret ballots. We cannot afford to have cell phones taken in the voting booth so we can record who we vote for and send it to our power rep to get paid bribes. It happened. Prohibiting the identification of the ballot number against a voter's name. I'm not sure how much it happens in this jurisdiction, but I know at least in one other jurisdiction in the Eastern Caribbean, a voter said to me, I went to vote and the returning officer called my ballot number against my name. So the political representative could go back and check who I voted for. We have to safeguard the integrity of the secret ballots. We have to look at the place of technology. Is it time for electronic ballots and advanced voting for the electoral election officers and security personnel? Is it time, as Sir Barham said, for us to count the votes by electronic means? And we have to have a clear distinction between the party representatives and election officials at the polling station. I should not have to guess who is who. And we have to look at actual pre-election monitoring, not just a few days before. Monitoring should start probably with the campaign, probably with the declaration of the poll day. And we have to look at post-election mortem, post-mortem after election, to drive a continuous reform process. So let's look at legal challenges and election petition. I think it is rather incomprehensible that there are time restrictions for filing election petitions and challenges, but the cases are allowed to drag beyond an election cycle. That is most ridiculous. In order to be of value, there has to be time limit by which all hearings and appeals are to be heard for legal challenges and election petition. And election petitions that cannot be appealed should not be done by a single judge. It doesn't make sense. So we do have some questions and concern about the electoral reform survey. And I won't dwell into it too much, but my understanding is the basis or the reason I was given is that the information that is gathered is about the mood of the population, behavioral values. For example, I imagine they will be trying to find out what percentage of respondents are taking the survey more than once to indicate the level of honesty in the society. Because at the end of the survey, it asks you, do you want to take the survey again? Are you serious? It cannot be that we are looking for data, that we are looking for desirable attributes of the population on electoral reform. I hope we are right, that we're looking for behavioral values. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Liebland. Thank you very much. And at this stage, I'd like to introduce Dr. Dion George. Dr. Dion George, will you make yourself known to us that you are available to speak before I introduce you?
Yes, I'm available and I can hear you clearly.
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
You may need to unmute your mic.
My mic is unmuted.
And say hello.
My mic is unmuted.
You are quite soft.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but very soft, very soft. You may need to turn your volume up.
Okay. 1 second.
Give us a test again, please.
Yes, can you hear me better now? Can you hear me?
Okay, Dr. Dion George is a lecturer of political science. He's also the director of religious education at Christ Our Hope Catholic Church. Dr. George is a proud native of the small farming community of Salisbury, Dominica. He has earned a PhD in political science at Clark Atlanta University, prior to which he had completed an MA in political science and BA in computer information systems from Midwestern State University. Dr. George has researched, presented, and taught on the issue of democratic political processes, constitutions, and provided analysis on the best practices for political efficacy in governance. He relishes the advancement of education and human rights, a tenacious advocate for the youth and agricultural sustainability. Dr. George is an educator. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Dion George joining us virtually from the US. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I want to thank God for, and I want to thank the organizers. I was charged with the responsibility to speak on a specific topic within the 10 minutes allotted, and that is campaign finance reform. And that is what I will do. However, I will say that with the whole idea of electoral reform, campaign finance reform do intersect with other areas like residency, and I would touch on that just a little bit. And so when we talk about campaign finance reform in the whole idea of making our elections better and freer and fairer in Dominica, by definition, campaign finance reform are efforts to change the rules of how political campaigns can be paid for with the aim to make it fairer. Typically, in most democracies, the general public tend to move toward campaign finance reform. The efforts are often geared towards putting a cap, or if you want, a restriction on special interest. For example, in the United States, that would be companies like the tobacco company. In Dominica, for example, that would be perhaps individuals, foreign individuals, or foreign entities who may want to invest in the country. And so the idea behind campaign finance reform is to really limit the amount of involvement that these entities or individuals would have in the elections. What is the reason behind that? In other words, what is the purpose for that? Well, the purpose in a nutshell is to remove big money from government, remove big money from politics. In other words, a foreign entity ought not to pay the vast amount of monies to support any political party in Dominica to win an election. And the rationale behind that is where you have an individual or a foreign entity, a foreign investor, contributing large sum of monies to a political party, what often happens is they become very influential. To put another way, they can literally buy that company. In other words, the government sort of indebted to them. And what happens on the ground, one would find that the investor would have most of the contracts by that government, and they are the one who decides who they contract with. They are the one who decides who they hire, etc. And so the bottom line here is when one speaks of campaign finance reform, the idea is to remove big money in politics and elections and let the people decide who wins the election. The way to achieve campaign finance reform, I would suggest looking at some of the successful models in the Caribbean. Notably, one can consider Jamaica, and one of the strong aspects of their experience is the development of the National Election Campaign Fund. And the purpose of that National Election Campaign Fund is one, to accept and receive contributions from individual companies and other entities, including the Dominican diaspora. That's number one. Number two, that they would make contributions to candidates and registered political parties during an election period. And number three, they would promote the active participation of citizens in the electoral process. And so these are the noted purpose for having a National election campaign fund. But I would dare to add that the establishment of such a fund in Dominica, I think that would heighten local and regional and international confidence in our elections, and it would reduce the perception of corruption in elections and campaign expenditure, i.e. how we spend our money during a campaign election. And of course, if that could reduce the perception of corruption, as it is right now, I think Dominica ranks 48 out of 180 on the corruption index. We get a score of 55 out of 100. Notably, in 2012, we dropped down three places. And so if we can incorporate some of these election improvement, election reforms, perhaps that can help in improving our perception of corruption. And so one of the things I decided I would talk about is some practical aspects of the National Election Campaign Fund. For example, the Jamaicans have clearly defined some terms that include, for example, donation, campaign, prescribed value. And one might say, well, this is very trivial. Well, actually, it's not that trivial, because what tends to happen is during a campaign, someone say, for example, no, we are not campaigning. Or they would receive large sums of monies from a foreign entity or from someone else, and they might say that's a gift that wasn't for politics. And so it is imperative to clearly define what is a donation, who is a contributor, and to have these fully operationalized. Another part of this National Election Campaign Fund is that it sets certain rules. For example, it says, for example, that if a person or entity were to contribute to any of the political party or candidate, and it passes what it's called a prescribed value, that they ought to report that to the Independent Electoral Reform Commission. Another rule is that any registered political party or individual ought not to knowingly accept contributions from persons where the fund or the source of the fund is dubious or suspect of corruption. And so these rules exist where the Electoral Commission will really guard those rules. And finally, on that note, there are penalties associated with such rules. One of the penalties, just for example's sake, says that if a party or a candidate violates the rules, then that person or party has committed a crime, which is punishable within the magistrate court. And so I think an incorporation of these campaign finance reform in our system would be to our benefit. Another note I want to mention is that the management of these funds should be free from political influence, of course, and should be handled by the Independent Electoral Commission. One of the functions of that Independent Electoral Commission would be to distribute the funds to the participating political parties during an election. And what that would mean is that there is a level playing field. With that being said, it would lead further to the need for not just campaign finance reform, but the need for some constitutional reform. What I mean by that is, if the Independent Electoral Commission is charged with distributing funds to the participating parties, then it ought to mean that we would have fixed election dates. Fixed election dates, say for example, all parties know when is the election. It cannot be such that in this day and age, that a political party can say, I will tell you when is the election, and then 1 month before, say election is December 2nd. It gives an unfair advantage. And if we're speaking toward making it a fairer process that has to be considered. And so the Independent Electoral Commission would disperse funds, say, for example, 3 months before the election. All right. The other thing that I would touch on is the whole idea of Dominica, perhaps, and I think not just perhaps, but ought to change the composition of the current Independent Electoral Commission. What we currently have is a situation where there are 3 persons on the government side and 2 persons on the opposition side. God knows, and we the people of Dominica knows, that that has proven to be chaotic, it's very unbalanced and ineffective. I recommend a move to dissolve the weightedness and the unfair advantage of the incumbent. And the way to achieve this is by adding a plurality of stakeholders to the Independent Electoral Commission. A more specific recommendation would say, for example, to have about 9 members, 2 from the major leading parties, so 2 from the United Workers' Party or 2 from the Labour Party, 1 appointed by the president, so that's 5. And then add 1 from the legal fraternity, 1 from the private sector, i.e. the economic engine of the country, or ought to be the economic engine of the country, and 1 from NGOs, and 1 from the religious sector. So that would be 9. And what that means, therefore, is it would dissolve the influence of a dominant party and make the process more balanced. On that note, the opposition do have a part to play as well. They can, in making the process fairer, work with connection with foreign governments as a form of intelligentsia to report persons who travel to Dominica to vote illegally. In that way, it would deter persons from doing such. But which leads me to almost my final point, which is residency. Persons coming to vote from overseas, a very contentious point in Dominica. One of the first things I would suggest is to consider the idea of, if someone is in Dominica within the last 5 years, that makes them eligible. I believe that is in contrary to another part of Dominica's election laws, which talks about residency, which simply says that your residence is where you live, where you work, and if you live there, you intend to come back there. And I think we need to clearly establish eligibility for voting. And the Independent Electoral Commission would be charged with creating that. There are those who might argue all these recommendations make sense, but how can we deal with the implementation of some of these? Well, of course, the Independent Electoral Commission is a regulatory body and would have the force of law. And I would suggest that at each voting station, that they would have had sworn-in election officers to monitor the eligibility of each voter. And that should be enforceable by law. Finally, the most talked about survey. Data is used to drive policy. This is true in business, this is true in government. But the data must be correct data. It cannot be that a survey that has been exposed infinity to the world, that has an opportunity to retake that survey, that has no parameters, what one would call in research a frame, a population frame, but it's really open-ended. And for the information gleaned from that to be used as an indication of the reflection of the people of Dominica, it is reporting information that is untrue and should not be used for such purpose. I thank you for my time.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. Yes, this is with Dr. Dion George in Atlanta. At this point, I would like to call on Mr. Randy Rodney to share some of your thoughts with us. I'm assuming he's still in the building and he may not have stepped out. Call his name one more time, Pastor Rodney.
You know there?
Okay, so he has stepped out. And then we will move straight into inviting Mr. Cleville Mills. Because right now we're into, well, we're still on the presentations, but we're very short presentations now. And then we move swiftly into recommendations. So Mr. Cleville Mills to the podium, please. And Mr. Mills represents
Dominica Consumer Protection Association.
Okay. Yes, so Mr. Mills represents Dominica Consumer Protection Association. Thank you.
I think you're going to have to use it. Yes, sir.
One second. Microphone. Can you check the microphone? It's off. Switch it on.
Okay, you could go ahead. Please go ahead. Go ahead. You're on.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator, and I want to say good morning also to the rest of the dignified persons on the panel, especially Sir Dennis Byron, the consultant on electoral reform in Dominica. The Dominica Consumer Protection Association
Okay, just use it, sir. Just use it.
the Dominica Consumer Protection Association also received a similar letter from Mr. Dennis Byron, and I want to really commend the Dominica Business Forum for organizing this consultation. It was also the intention of the Dominica Consumer Protection to have a real public consultation on the question of electoral reform, or what we call in this consultation, electoral legislation review and consultation, with a view of really having a balanced public input into the consultation that we can hear from everybody. So the 5 minutes that have been granted to the association, I'd just like to point out that the association is very much aware Yes, the association is very much aware of the ongoing narrative for electoral reform, blinded by a bright white cloud of fake news, disinformation, and defamation. A system of undue influence not yet outlawed by our electoral laws and criminal laws. As Sir Dennis Byron explained earlier on, that in determining electoral reform, one of the things that they have to take into consideration is the mood of the people. So the history of that call for electoral reform should not be ignored and must be in the correct context. We must bear in mind that history. For instance, in Dominica, that call for electoral reform really started sometime after the 2005 general election. Now that result of the election, they were challenged in the court, in the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and they failed. There was also a foil attempt by the minority on the Electoral Commission to suppress votes of electors who generated their livelihood in the diaspora. That smoking gun and emails of the interference to maintain the core practice of widespread fraud in our election. There was an email, and that email has been referred to on several occasions, indicating that it was an intention to cause widespread fraud in our elections. But if one looks closely at the email is saying that there was madness going on in the commission. And what was the madness? The Electoral Commission wanted to revise the voters list with the intention to disenfranchise voters living in the diaspora. And the madness really was that decision was a decision that was null and void, in the sense that for any decision of the commission, it has to be a decision by the majority of all the members of the commission. And the conversation that came through that email indicates that the two members representing the government was not in attendance at that meeting, which means to say that only two members voted for that decision. The majority did not vote. So by that extension, it was null and void. So I just need to make that point. Also, the results of the 2005 elections and the 2009 elections, also the 2019 elections, were challenged in the court, and those challenges failed. And those challenges was based on the fact, on the accusation of widespread fraud. So we need to have the context in which we are screaming for electoral reform. And that doesn't mean to say that the Consumer Association is against electoral reform, because electoral reform is not a reform where you fix the match. It is a reform for really free and fair election. You do not hype the population into saying that there is fraud, that there is corruption in election, when it has been tried before the court. We will bring ourselves almost like America, that big lie. So when we are making points, we have to make sure that they are authentic. So based on that context, one of the basic changes that the Dominican Consumer Protection Association would like to see included in our electoral reform is that summary offenses must be filed in the same manner like election petition by the Director of Public Prosecution on a complaint made to the police by an elector who is duly registered in the constituency in accordance with the powers of the Director of Public Prosecution under the Constitution. We are also advocating, like in Jamaica, removal of the 5-year absence disqualification should be removed. In Jamaica, as we like to quote, people are not removed from the list because they have been away for 5 years. They are removed from the list when people die. What they do, every now and then, they call upon some type of re-registration to really update the list. So we can also take that key from the Jamaica model. We also recommend that there should be strict laws against fake news disinformation, and defamation. This is a type of undue influence, especially when we are talking about the mood of the people. With disinformation and misinformation, we can falsely affect the mood of the people when we want to talk about fairness in elections. And we also believe that, very importantly, that at every election, there should be a list published of the persons who voted. That list will help in the process of cleansing the list, because you have a list of everybody who voted in the last election. So I think that would be very important in assisting in electoral reform and trying to bring more integrity to our electoral process. So these are the few, these are the very few point of views of the Dominica Consumer Protection Association, and we really wish that out of this consultation, we can really have objective discussion on the question of electoral reform. We do not hype people on a false narrative and then use that as an excuse to call for electoral reform. Electoral reform, last thing I want to say, it has to be an effort to upgrade the system, because like everything else, we need to be modernized. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. We would like to quickly invite to the podium Mr. Crispin Gregoire of the White Kubuli Association for Viable Environment. We are onto this section of very short presentations right now, and obviously we need to move a little more swiftly in the interest of time that we were denied of earlier for unforeseen circumstances. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Crispin Gregoire.
Yes, you could just go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Severin McKenzie, Chairman of the Dominica Business Forum. Mr. Dennis Byron, Consultant to the Electoral Commission. The media, civil society organizations, political parties present. Ladies and gentlemen, let me at the outset thank the Dominica Business Forum for organizing today's session entitled Electoral Legislation Review Consultation. I speak today as a representative of the board of White Kubuli Advocates for Viable Environment. WAVE is the acronym, and it is the successor organization of the Dominica Conservation Association. WAVE is a legally constituted non-governmental organization in Dominica. It received its legal status earlier this year, and I am honored to serve as a board member of that organization. WAVE welcomes this opportunity to make this public pronouncement on the future of electoral reform in the Commonwealth of Dominica. It is our hope that the newly constituted Electoral Commission will make comprehensive electoral reform its foremost priority, because past electoral commissions in the last 15 years has not served the interest of the Dominican people. And I hope that under the chairmanship of Mr. Duncan Stowe, that we will see a different dispensation in Dominica towards comprehensive electoral reform. I must say that electoral reform is critical and urgent for political stability on Dominica. We have watched with dismay how successive electoral cycles in the last 15 to 20 years have been increasingly characterized by many elements of bad electoral governance, which we, the people of Dominica, know very well, and which we should not tolerate any longer. A review of our electoral laws is indeed critically necessary for improved electoral governance. For WAVE, the electoral reform agenda should include the following: a change in the composition of the Electoral Commission to include civil society representation and expert representation, as well as taking away the voting rights from political party representatives on the Electoral Commission and giving voting rights only to non-party members of the Commission. That does not alter the representation of the political parties on the Commission, but we would like to see that the logjam that is the hallmark of today's Electoral Commission must end, and end forthwith. We should address diaspora voting, and other speakers before me have already mentioned that, but that is an element that has to be addressed. We also need to implement all the recommendations of the Electoral Observer missions from 2009 to 2019. And I'm speaking here of the recommendations of the OAS Electoral Observer Mission, the Commonwealth, and the CARICOM Observer Mission. In addition, as regards these recommendations, I just want to highlight four that I think are very, very important. One, access to the media, all media by all political parties during campaign season. The total misuse of foreign aid for campaign advantage is not to be tolerated in our country. Campaign finance regulations are critically needed because those type of election campaigns we saw over the last 15 years is not the hallmark of good governance that we want to see in our country as far as electoral governance goes. And finally, on that question, is the voter ID cards. That's critically necessary. And legitimate and accurate voters list. As well as, and that's very important, that our electoral governance in Dominica must be defined by the Inter-American Democracy Charter, which Dominica ratified in 2001. It will be critically important for the background to that electoral reform process, highlight the things that we have committed our country to under the Inter-American Democracy Charter. We believe that the electoral reform process must be inclusive, fair, and transparent. WAVE is of the view that the esteemed Sir Dennis Byron has great competence and considerable experience as a lawyer, as a jurist, as an international jurist, a man who has served on the UN tribunal. And he understands what good governance is and should be. And I hope, it is our hope, and it's WAVE's hope, that Sir Dennis Byron will be impartial in his engagement with civil society and political forces in the pursuit of nothing less than comprehensive electoral reform. WAVE hopes that this electoral reform will lead to a national consensus on the future electoral governance for the next 50 years. And hopefully, we will have unanimous approval of the legislation that will arise from this process by the Dominica House of Assembly. Finally, WAVE wishes to underscore its unwavering commitment to the full participation in this process towards comprehensive electoral reform in our country. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crispin, very well. Thank you. At this point, we would like to open the mic to our audience here and those with us virtually. So if there's anyone, we begin here and we ask those who are listening to prepare themselves. If you have anything that you would like to add to this event, to this discussion today, please feel free and come up to the microphone and speak. Yes, sir, please. I'm sure after you, there will be at least 3 other persons who will eventually make up their minds to participate. Yes. You see your name.
Yeah, I think it's good afternoon at this point.
Yes.
Yes, good afternoon to all, and my name is El Bruno from the lovely village of Wana, and I am the Vice President of Concerned Citizen Movement in Dominica, but I'm not here in that capacity because my team has taken their own position with regards to the entire, with regards to the consultation with Byron. But I want to thank the Business Forum. I want to thank all of the persons who are on board. And I want to go on record today to register my support to all of the endeavors to give the people of Dominica free and fair elections. I want to be on the record to say that I am in support of all those who are making that move to do what is right in the best interests of the people of Dominica. I stand for that. I am for that. I am with you on that. And so Dennis Byron, I want to speak directly to you, sir. And as I understand it in Dominica, through the length and breadth that you have served with honor in the Caribbean, and I honor you, and I respect you as a Black Caribbean brother. I'm proud of you. And I want to go on record to say to you, sir, that I support you in being part of the movement to get free and fair elections in Dominica. I am on board. But I want to go on record to suggest and to say to the world and to Dominica that failure to get it right as the main leader and the main man to stand in protest on the street, we fail to get it right for the people of Dominica and what is in the best interest for the people of Dominica, I, of course, will be the one to lead the people of Dominica in massive protests. All right. So, in closing, I want to say that I look forward in we all doing what is in the best interest for the people of the great Commonwealth of Dominica. I thank you, and may God bless all of us in Dominica.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you. We'd like to invite anyone from the virtual audience who may want to share. We have folks on Zoom and so on. Please feel free to add your voice to the discussion. So Byron is very attentive, as you can see, he has been on screen. He's smiling as I just said that. And we're very happy about that for a fact. So let us share words. Anything from anyone else out there? Anyone else here? Yeah.
I'd love, I don't know. Hello.
From Roseau Central.
Hello.
You say one or two things about yourself. Okay.
Sure. Good afternoon. As you said, Mr. Bob, my name is Ito, Bernard Ito. I am the new political leader of the Dominica Freedom Party. And I'm just here to share my views, my party position, not a party position, but my view as a Dominican citizen. This is not a contentious issue from a political point of view, but certainly want to share a few ideas on this. And I won't rehash the entire thing. I mean, everything that has been said, the substantive issues. All the issues raised by Mr. LeBlanc and all the various speakers and presenters. My good friend, Mr. George Dion, my fellow alumni from MSU. He has addressed the substantive issues in terms of the recommendations that are made. So there's not a whole lot left for me to say on this, but what I will say is it's sort of a recurring issue on this electoral reform that is almost to the point of being ridiculous, right? I mean, Dominica is a small island state. The number of voters in our island is a minuscule amount of voters compared to most democracies. And yet we are struggling decades to implement the most basic things that could be done practically overnight with any sustained, determined effort. In this day of analytics, big data processing, in these days of technology that allows us to run millions of bits of data in an hour, we are struggling. Dominica's database is a small, I'm a data scientist myself. Dominica's database is something that you could run within 5 minutes. I mean, it's such a minuscule, it's less than 50,000 pieces of data for you to run and analyze. And we struggle to analyze and to get that reform done in any meaningful matter. I mean, it just tells you this is not a technical issue. This is a political issue. This is a social issue. This is an impedance issue. This has nothing to do with the technical and the work necessary and the effort necessary to do this. With concerted effort and alignment on goals and objectives, this thing could be wrapped up in weeks. But yet we struggle decades and decades to make this happen, and it tells you there is a lot of opposition to truly accomplishing this goal. And I think we must stay focused on that reality. And while these things that we do, these consultations, Sir Dennis is coming in to work on these things, while these things are important, we have to stay focused on the issue, that the real issue is not the technical things. The real issue is not the work to be done. The real issue is how do we get the political will to actually have these things happen. This is so I do not want us to get distracted with all these big efforts and all these big things and all these big technical discussions about what we need to do and the recommendations. Yes, these things are necessary, but that's not the fundamental issue. As I said, Dominica's electoral reform is a trivial issue to solve. Everybody in Dominica knows everybody. You could go into any village and everybody know who should vote and who shouldn't vote. Anybody can tell you who's foreign and wasn't in India for 2 years, and their mother and their father and their uncle and their nana. Everybody knows everybody. It's not a very difficult thing to go into every community and simply have a consultation and an understanding and have a clean voters list within weeks. And so this issue where we keep coming into these fancy consultations and these things gives the implication that we have some insoluble problem, that we have some monumental challenge ahead of us to solve. But this is not the case. I want to go on record and say this is not the case. With a concerted effort, a group of professionals could come in Dominica and have this issue resolved in Sydney. And so, Sir Byron, I want to talk to you directly and say, I hope that it is in this spirit that you bring this movement to truly make some movement along the clearing the debris, clearing the issues that prevent that professional approach from being taken to be implemented. I have one direct criticism, and it's been raised before by my friend Dr. George, on the issue of the survey. I mean, clearly that survey is not scientific in any means, and I'm very disappointed that with the resources available to the commission, that at least not one social scientist or economist or survey designer was involved in the process of putting this together. I mean, this is completely illegitimate survey. If an undergraduate had submitted that to me as a survey in one of my courses, I would fail that. So that survey is completely meaningless. And it just disappoints me that that is the case, because it reflects to me that there's a certain level of perception creation, but not the real technical professional work, at least in that aspect. And I'm not certainly criticizing every aspect, but from this point of view of this survey, this is not professional and acceptable. So thanks again, and I hope that we can make progress in getting to the root issue of why we do not have electoral reform in Dominica, and let's not get hung up on the technical and the work burden and all the logistic considerations that we get dragged into. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ito. Thank you very much. Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, I don't know whether you can hear me. Yes. yes,
Senator
yes.
Thompson
Hi.
Portsmouth.
Yes, I am.
Okay, you can proceed. Thank you.
Yes. Hi. Good afternoon to everybody. And it was really very informative listening to everybody presenting here today. And one thing, I guess just one observation.
Tell us where you're joining us from.
Oh, I'm actually in New York right now. I'm sitting in front of my computer doing my teaching, and I just thought that was something I didn't want to miss. I wanted to hear everything that was going on, and one of the things that I did kind of recognize is just the aspect of maybe I might have joined late, but I did not hear or see any female presenting here today, and I think that's a very integral part of the process. I will not rehash everything that was said, but again, I think everyone should make a reference to the OAS report that was filed after the last election. There are many recommendations presented there. There are many observations that are presented there. Dominica has a flawed system, and based on everything that I see, the most fundamental and basic right of every citizen is the opportunity to vote freely and fairly. And based on everything that we've seen in the past, these rights have not been exhibited in the right way. And so I'm looking at the entire process of, which is sort of like a repetitious process that has been going on for a very long time. We wonder again how Sir Dennis Byron getting involved in this process is going to really change the process significantly. How is it going to impact the process? Another very great concern that I have, which has been expressed by other individuals, is the fact that this particular survey, how much weight is this survey going to be given to the final recommendations that are made? Because just as all of the presenters noted, and I have noted, that this survey is so extremely flawed. There is not a sample size. Anybody anywhere in the world can take the survey. It can be done multiple times. I could have had every single student of mine sit, and I was actually contemplating doing that. Having every single one of my students who knows nothing about Dominica complete the survey. And that is just an example of how flawed this survey is. So what kind of weight is this survey going to be given in terms of going towards the final recommendations for electoral reform in Dominica that is so greatly needed? Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everyone listening. I won't take up more of your time. Have a good day, and thanks for the opportunity.
Say it again.
We noticed that our mics here were off.
Say it again.
So I want to see, is there anyone else out there who would like to add their voice to the discussion? Feel free. Anyone else in here?
Hello?
Okay.
Yes, we have participants. Yes, sir. Tell us your name, where you call it from.
Yes. Yes, good morning to everybody. Good morning to the participants. My name is Donovan Fabian, and I'm calling from North Carolina. I've been listening to I joined late, I must say, and I've been listening to the discussion. And I just briefly say that I'm happy this is taking place, because I think it is important to have electoral reform. I heard some references being made about the past reports from the OAS and the Commonwealth and CARICOM. But I must note that every one of them said Dominica had free and fair elections. Like everything else, things can be improved. And I applaud the effort to attempt to bring reform to Dominica, in the modern day best practices. So I applaud Sir Dennis Byron for his effort and the people who put this together. Now, we must approach this thing in a mature and rational manner. And I think what hinders the progress of this endeavor is a lot of people coming to this with a hostile and a very irrational stance. Some people seem to think that they should dictate exactly what the reform should be. Okay, if we're looking for fairness in the system, we cannot approach this with a high-handed attitude, right? We should have mature consultation, civil discussions, right? And the attack on the survey is one such example. Granted, the survey may have, I'm not a survey expert. It could have been better, but the survey is not the be on end all to this effort. It's only part of the consultation, like we are doing today. This is another part, okay? But the manner in which it's attacked, it tells me that people are coming to this with a hostile disposition, right? And that does not help the discussion. It does not help the attempt to bring reform, right? We have to speak respectfully. We have to approach this with civility and with honesty, and not from a biased position. So I want to thank everyone again for the opportunity, and I hope that we can achieve, you know, an amicable solution to this problem, which has been lingering for some time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. We're still open to responses. Anybody else online would like to add their voice to the discussion? You may have heard something you want clarification on, or you may want to add a thought to something yourself. And it appears that there's nobody. So we will move straight into the next section of our program.
Straight to Byron.
So Byron? All right, someone has a question. My apologies to Byron, let's allow him a question. Yeah, you have to come on the line. Yes, you will say your name, what community you're from, and feel free to speak to us.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Dunstan, Maggie Peters, Newtown, Unsiawi. I'd just like to ask a simple question. Did we, I hear is here sitting, but I want to know confirmation. Did we really pay $450,000 for this consultation? Did we pay? Is that a fact? Thank you.
For this consultation?
No, for the process, I mean, what the Mr. Dennis Byron.
Well, this is a question that Ivan would maybe have to address.
Okay, we will allow Mr. Dennis Byron to speak with us now. In our segment, we have a question and answers and summation, Sir Byron. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Sir Dennis Byron, the head of this project. And after that, we wrap up.
Well, thank you very much. I must say that I found this exercise very informative. The freedom of expression is an important part of the democratic exercise. And in any activity of this nature, it's important to take note of differences of opinion as part of the whole process of understanding what has been described as the mood of the population. So these are important aspects of the exercise that I am undertaking. As I had mentioned in my early remarks, though, at the end of the day, I still have to make my recommendations based on my own independent judgment. These will, of course, be refined by the information I get, and we have decided to have a wide range of consultative exercises. We have invited written submissions, many of which we have already received. We've had the survey, and although the survey has had its critics, it still exists, it has been there, and the results of it, the analysis of it will be formally published, so everybody can have an opportunity to see exactly what transpired and the analysis from which it has been made of it. I think from my own perspective, it would probably be better to wait until after that has been completed for me to make any comments as to the quality of the survey or not. I think that this consultative exercise has been very useful. And I had indicated earlier, and I do again, that this will not be the last such consultation, because we have now got a certain section of the community who has expressed itself, and I think that it is useful to allow other community sectors. And I've already received requests from 2 other organizations, and within the next few days, there will be some public information of these particular consultations and the dates and manner in which they will occur. After those consultations, which have been organized or by organizations within the community, I may have a final consultation which will be based on which will not be linked to any organization, but it will be an open consultation. I don't think that it's necessary for me to say any more at this stage, but to say thank you to all the presenters. It's quite clear that a lot of thought has been, and a lot of research has been put into the work that has been presented before us today. And I will certainly pay attention and spend some more time studying the recommendations and the views which have been expressed. So just like to express, finally, once more, express thanks to the Dominica Business Forum for putting this together. And I'd like to thank the moderator, Mr. Bob, for his professional work in managing this exercise. So I thank you all very much.
We will do the vote of thanks. Mr. John Robin, with the vote of thanks.
Yes.
Before you give comments, Mr. Robin, I would just like to say that a number of our presenters were unable to join us today because of the inclement weather, and we hope and look forward to also the delay. The hour and a half delay also played a major role in that as well, because they too have their day 7
On behalf of the Dominica Business Forum, I want to take this moment to thank, first of all, Dennis Barrett for gracing us with his presence today and accommodating us in Dominica the opportunity, especially for the Dominica Business Forum, to play a critical role in formulating this process. We are very confident that we have done critical work. And this I'm sure will allow to achieve the objective higher process. I want to thank the President, who has worked tirelessly to ensure that everything came out right, because I know that it's a very tedious job, and many obstacles, but through it all, we have made this far. The moderator, King Barrett, I want to thank you for a job well done. And we also want to recognize the media, the people in the diaspora, and those online. We want to thank each of you. We also want to recognize the committee of the Dominica Business Forum who have basically put this together. We want to thank all those of you who have taken time off and have come to be with us here today. We think, all in all, we have served the purpose. This was an opportunity that was afforded and had some people like myself not taken the courage, not have the courage, the intestinal fortitude to stand up for truth, not for party, no opposition, no leading power, but to stand up because we think this was a just process, it was a necessary process, and we needed some people to stand up and make it happen. And I want to tell you it was not an easy process, and it doesn't matter what people may say. We think that the opportunity was provided for us to be engaged in the process, and I think we have done the state of Dominica well by allowing this to happen. So I want to thank you. I want to thank the Lord for basically giving us or choosing us to make this thing happen at this time. I thank each and every one once again. God bless you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, both near and far, we thank you for being here with us today once again. This ceremony, this occasion is officially closed. Thanks again. Get home safely. See you the next time.
Thank you, Mr. Byron.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you, and goodbye.
Yeah, bye.
You want me to unmute?
Yeah, I'm just saying thank you again.
I'm not hearing you just now.
Yes,
Are you saying something, Sir Dennis?
No, I was just saying thank you and goodbye.
Oh, thank you, Sir Dennis. Goodbye. And I think we also have to thank the venue, the new venue that made it quite possible.